The demand for authenticity, the demand for transparency, and the ability to have that two-way street is growing. So I think brands have to respond to that. And I think the upcoming generation just intrinsically kind of gets that. That's their expectation too. The message where we craft it, we push it out, that's the end of the journey, is going to go away more and more. And the dialogue and being willing to accept feedback, good and bad, and thinking about how you respond to that is going to become more and more the norm.
Rapid changes in communications technology have drastically changed the way we all work, especially for those of us working in communication. In a world where the next big things often emerge faster than courses can be prepared to teach them, how are colleges working to equip the next generation of communications professionals? Today, Melanie Wilt connects with a communications professor to learn how academia keeps pace with the trends reshaping the industry, and what has to be done to ensure students have the proper hard skills and soft skills needed to succeed in this ever-changing field. That's all ahead on today's episode of Shooting the Shift. Hello and welcome to Shooting the Shift, a venture here at Shiftology Communication where our team of communication professionals take time to reflect, share, and provide insights into what we do every day to help our clients reach more, convince more, and win more. I'm Dan Toland, Director of Virtual Experiences here at Shiftology, and we're happy you've tuned in to today's episode titled The Next Generation of Communication.
This is my first time getting to host the Shooting the Shift podcast, and I'm really excited to be joined by Mary Sterenberg with Ohio State University, who is a lecturer and teacher there and advises the PRSSA, Public Relations Student Society of America program. Mary is a fellow Buckeye and also a native of the great Clark County, Ohio, where Shiftology is headquartered. So welcome to the show, Mary.
Thanks so much for having me.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and the role you play with the OSU in the PR program and the PRSSA group?
Sure. So as you said, Melanie, I'm a faculty advisor for the Public Relations Student Society of America chapter at Ohio State, which is one of the biggest chapters in the nation. I also teach full-time, so I really am kind of in charge of the strategic communication track within the School of Communication at Ohio State. And my current role is I'm assistant professor of practice. So that means I have one foot in industry and one foot in academia, which is kind of a growing area within academia. And then my kind of foot in industry is I freelance write and I do a lot of executive writing coaching. So that's kind of where I spend my days.
As a fellow Buckeye, you have seen changes at the university over the years in terms of there was a journalism school. Now we have a communications school. I was an agricultural communication major there at Ohio State in the 90s. And I believe I was the last AgCom major to be allowed to take the broadcast journalism track in the journalism school.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay.
I was very much had one foot in each area and really enjoyed that experience. And I know that the curriculum has changed. And at the time, we were thinking we were way ahead of the curve, talking about 24-hour news at that time.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't even a digital camera device that we were just talking about that as something that might come up in the future at that time. So a lot has changed in the last couple of decades. Communication rapidly advances. We see artificial intelligence coming on and changing things even more quickly than ever. What are some of the things that you're seeing that have changed dramatically in the last decade or so from your seat there at the university?
I feel old because I remember when social media was brand new and I wasn't at the university at that time. And I remember how that changed so much within the communication industry. And I really feel like that happened and it has changed more and more quickly. But with generative AI, we're probably at the cusp of something like that, where we've got this another cliff kind of that we're falling off in the communication industry overall. So I do think we're in the midst of some of the biggest changes we've seen. In general, things just move more rapidly. So it's challenging for academia to keep pace. The reality is we can't always keep pace in the same way that industry does, just because there are things we can't do quickly. So we can't, create and approve a brand new course quickly. But over time, those things have happened. So like you said, there might not have been, digital cameras at that time. Now we have, entire courses built around helping teach students to use digital courses and audio and video softwares and things like that. But if there's something new happening in social media or generative AI, we can't have a course on the books by fall. What we can do is make sure that our instructors are keeping pace with industry. We're talking to professionals, we're taking continuing education, we're going to conferences, we're getting into employers, and then we're bringing that information back to students. So within the courses that we have built, within student organizations like PRSSA, we can then incorporate the new things that we're learning, the new things that we're hearing. And I really think that's why, my role, the professor of practice title, that's a growing role at universities across the nation, because I think they understand that in addition to the value of the research and the academic portion and the tenure track faculty, there's a lot of value in teaching faculty who do have a foot in industry, who can keep a finger on that pulse and bring those things back into the classroom. So, those are the kinds of things that I'm doing when I'm not in the classroom, are connecting with alumni, connecting with professionals, educating myself, and then bringing that back to my students and my colleagues.
That's so valuable to those of us in industry too, to know that the students will be prepared for the actual jobs when they get out into the workforce and have an idea of what we're expecting, because it's different than being in an academic setting when you're rushing to meet deadlines and turn things around quickly and respond to, manage expectations and all of those things that are just hard to teach in a classroom setting.
And they're preparing for remote and hybrid work environments. So there are things happening in the world, even beyond just the communication industry, that makes the workforce look so different now than it did even a couple of years ago.
How do you address those things in PR classes? Do you talk about those kind of extraneous things outside of PR processes and research, planning, implementation, evaluation? How do you work in the, just the real life, hey, you're going to have to understand how this works when you get out there?
I do. I mean, I definitely think that that's important for them, because success in a job is not just, do you know the nuts and bolts of the industry? It's also about, can you work with other people and can you function, whether it's remote or hybrid or in person? So I share with students, but it's kind of like when you tell your kids something versus when someone else tells your kids something. I tell them, and they know that I am an industry professional, but it means even more when they hear it directly from those folks who are working, who are going to be hiring them. So I try to bring professionals in as guest speakers. I encourage the students to get mentors. We have a couple different mentoring programs through the department and through PRSSA. We take students out, agency tours, networking trips. So I think those are the ways that they're hearing directly. You need to be able to work with people. You need to be able to write. You need to know this tool and that tool, because those things are really important in addition to some of those fundamental communication skills.
So talking about writing, that's been a challenge that I've noticed, that writing is not as quite the same as when I was growing up. We didn't abbreviate everything in text. That's just a way of life now for those in Gen Z and younger. How do we maintain the sanctity of grammar and sentence structure and all of those things that are part of the very foundation of communication?
That is a very real challenge. I don't know if I have the answer, other than we are working really, really hard to just keep that drumbeat up with students, that it is so important, that it is a core skill, and try to dispel the myth that it's not a core skill anymore. So I think we're working on the mindset piece. And even with the fallout kind of from COVID, we're seeing a dip in the writing skills. When students have that 2 or 3 years where they weren't getting kind of those fundamentals. So we're working to recoup that. But I do think the first step is them understanding that it's a really core skill, so they're committed to improving. So I teach an advanced PR writing class, and I wrote an open source textbook for that class on PR writing. And I went and interviewed and videoed, maybe 15 professionals. And I said, okay, what do you think are the core skills students need? And these are professionals that were everything from, I run a PR agency, to I work in digital, to I work in video, I work in graphics. Every single one named writing as one of their core competencies. So that's what I go in equipped with my students. I'm saying, I talk to everybody across the industry. they are all saying, whether you want to go into advertising, social media, whatever you want to go into, they're all saying you have to be a good writer. We're doing the best we can, but really there is that continual drumbeat of telling them this is important. The accuracy, the precision is important.
I have an 18-year-old who wants to go into communication, and he's actually going to go play football at a smaller school and would like to do sports communication someday. And I think he thinks somebody's just going to hand him a microphone and tell him to go analyze a game. Because, I talk about the communication skills, and he really is an excellent writer and understands how to communicate very well. But I think he thinks he's not going to have to take any written journalism classes or PR classes. And as far as he's concerned, what I do and what he's planning to do are nothing the same. But like you said, you can't tell your kids anything.
Now, we slightly changed our core curriculum in strategic communication to add another writing class. So what was an elective that some students could take to take the upper level PR writing class, as a department, we said, no, they need to be taking additional writing classes. So I guess that's one shift too. We're requiring that if you're going to go into that strategic communication track. So yes, tell him, others echo what you say. He should emphasize the writing, and maybe he'll also get a microphone.
I'll let you tell him. It'll go over easier. So as we shift to more short form content, right? A lot of short form video, short form script, short form written content for digital media, social media. What changes do you anticipate in digital and social media and PR over the next several years? I hate to even say 5 years, because I don't think we can predict what will happen in 5 years, but maybe in the next 2 years.
To me, what is going to become more and more important as we look at generative AI and we look at all the new tools that are coming and going, and now everyone likes Reels and now TikTok, and those things will continue to come and go, but the really critical thinking and the strategy behind it are going to carry through. So I think as we get smaller content, each word matters more, but it still fits into that bigger picture of what's the strategy? What's the consumer insights that are driving this? Why do we think this is going to be effective? Whether it's short form, long form, but I do think that strategy piece gets more and more important, and the research and the analytics and responding gets more and more important because we don't have as many words when we execute. So all those other pieces kind of grow in importance.
The essence of communication and the need for that strategic thinking about creating meaning for people doesn't change no matter what the platform is. It can be 10 seconds on TikTok. It can be a 10-page white paper. The point is that you have to create meaning for somebody else, or communication doesn't take place.
And experience, some of it comes with experience.
It does take time. That is for sure. So how are you seeing students today get involved in the communication PR industry? What are some of those things that they're learning from alumni as they go through internships, volunteer opportunities, being involved in the practice there at OSU?
I think they hear lots of different things. They're hearing the critical thinking, the importance of critical thinking. They are hearing a lot how much they need to be plugged into the news. So I think the other thing about social media is in some ways it makes news consumption simpler, right? You have more ways to consume news, but it also makes it easy to only be seeing things in your normal kind of media consumption habits, right? If you're only looking at what pops up on your phone as the news highlights, you're missing really important aspects of what's going on in the world and going on in your industry. So we talk a lot about being intentional, right? Do you need to listen to podcasts like this one? Do you need to be getting emails from trade publications? What different news outlets do you need to be following? We talk a lot about mentoring, right? Connect yourself with someone who's farther up in the industry than you, someone who's not your direct boss that you can ask real questions about and have them tell you what they think you should be learning. A lot of professionals, and I agree with this too, tell the students, even if you have a hybrid or a remote work situation, seek out ways to be around people that you can learn from. Ask to sit into meetings, go to networking events, join professional organizations. You're going to learn things by being around it that you never even think to ask. So I think just encouraging them to be sponges and to be learners. Everyone talks about leadership, but I have one real distinguished alum that always tells the students, I appreciate that you want to tell me about your leadership skills, but you don't start in the industry as a leader. I need you to come in and be willing to learn and listen and I want to hear your ideas, but I need to know that you want to be a quick learner more than I need to hear that you're going to be a leader out of the gate in the professional world. And I thought that was insightful.
Very much so. As entry-level employees come in PR and communication, we find that because we're doing hybrid and remote work, we don't have the opportunity to like learn by osmosis, where you and I were sitting next to our boss, watching how they did things, watching how they handled a difficult situation or a media pitch. And we have to be a lot more intentional in the way that we teach those and onboard and train, so that we're not missing those critical basic entry-level skills, managing deadlines and those kinds of things. And I've noticed, you mentioned mentoring and them having and seeking out a mentor, but it's amazing what the mentor learns from that relationship as well. I've learned so much from, whether we call them a leader or not in the organization, or whether they have that title or not, they have the opportunity to lead in different ways, like being on the cusp, being on the forefront of the new technology and the new things that are coming, and teaching us that have become a little stuck in our ways, how to see the value of those platforms and the different ways that we communicate.
That's a great point. That I love that point, because I work with students all the time. When you are talking to them and working with them, you see that and the value. And I'll read things about generational differences and frustrations with Gen Z and things like that. And I feel so differently about it because I work with them all the time. So, and they'll say, "Oh, did you see this trend on TikTok?" I'm like, "I didn't. Tell me what the trend is. Let's think about how we can use it."
I need to do better about that too. So I'm constantly learning from them. And I will say one thing, that probably my biggest takeaway from college at The Ohio State University was learning how to learn and learning how to be a lifelong learner. And in the communication industry, there is absolutely nothing more important than continually being willing to learn. And that is not always easy. As we get older and we get, we understand processes and we get comfortable with the way we do things, we have to force ourselves out of those habits to continue to learn. And I credit a lot of that philosophy that I continue to have to my experience at Ohio State.
Well, I think your instructors would be happy to hear that. I mean, that's a great take. That will never fail you. Never.
So one of the things that I've noticed in the last year or so is just how consumers are changing how they're using social media. I read a statistic from Morning Consult that 61% of US adults with a social media account said they've become more selective about what they post. And I've noticed this even with myself. I post less, I watch more, kind of that lurker mentality versus engaging in dialogue or commenting or liking things on different social media. Have you seen that reflected? Do you have any insight on how that change is taking place and how we in PR might find ways to measure or look at that kind of engagement or lack of engagement?
Yes, that's a good point. You think back to something like the ice bucket challenge, right? You had these huge viral trends. And now it is a lot more watching, and because it's becoming more fragmented, I think, all the time. So everybody's not on the same platforms. They're on many different platforms, and they're using those platforms in a lot of different ways when you have things like stories and reels. So I do think there's more listening, but I think it makes for a very exciting time in PR, because it makes the puzzle of how you connect and resonate with consumers that much more complex. So, you're trying to put together your creative ideas with what's going to resonate in that research you have on those consumers and the data that you're getting back on how something's performing, and trying to figure out how you even pivot real time. So, I think that's where things are going, is that real time pivot where, you maybe do some A/B testing and you've got some data on the back end, and you put something out there and maybe people respond and the way you expected, and maybe they don't. If you look at things like Wendy's social media, right? Wendy's Twitter account.
They do great.
There's not a lot about their brand that says, yes, if you should be able to roast people on Twitter and have the entire public think that it's hilarious and on brand for you when you're a very family friendly brand, but they took a risk and it worked. But other brands have tried something and it just didn't. And so you have to pivot in the moment and try to navigate that. So I think it's kind of fun but very data driven. I think the data driven piece is whether it's before you try something or along the way as you look at how things are resonating, that's going to be a big part of the future. So we talk to the students a lot about analytics, getting as much analytics experience as they can, understanding the data piece of it, and also tying it to business objectives. We have to tie things to business objectives in ways we never had to kind of prove before, which is great for us. I think it shows our value so much more tangibly. But for the students, they need to understand a creative idea for creative idea's sake is probably not going to be enough in the world they're going into. A creative idea that you can show contributed to what a client or an organization wants, that's really, really valuable.
I've noticed that using that data to relate communication to the business objectives for leadership within a corporation is critical, because traditional organizations like the ones we work with in agriculture and healthcare very much have a thought process of, we need to get this information out there. And if we get this information out there in a science-based way, then we know we're going to, meet our objectives. Well, that doesn't necessarily work. Just because they want to say it a certain way and they want to put the information out there in a way that they may have always done, a more traditional public relations approach where there wasn't a two-way feedback. We have to convince the leadership teams that they need to take some risks and think about how people are receiving the information and engaging with the information, instead of just, well, we have to say it this way. It becomes a little more audience focused than entity focused. And I've seen that be a huge shift in how organizations are approaching their publics.
I agree. And the demand for authenticity, the demand for transparency, and the ability to have that two-way street is growing. Brands have to respond to that. And I think the upcoming generation just intrinsically kind of gets that. That's their expectation too. Yeah, the message where we craft it, we push it out, that's the end of the journey, is going to go away more and more. And the dialogue and being willing to accept feedback, good and bad, and thinking about how you respond to that is going to become more and more the norm.
Public relations is a relatively new industry in this whole scheme of things. It's about 100 years old roughly, and it started with government. I hate to say it, but propaganda in a sense, that we were putting out information in a certain way. And I worked in government even in, around 2000, we were able to control the narrative just by using good public relations practices, using research and planning and implementing and evaluating our programs. But we didn't have to consider all of that instant real-time feedback that we do today. That's just part of the constant communication loop, and it moves much, much faster than it used to.
Challenges, many, many challenges, but it makes it fun and ever changing. This industry is not going to stay the same, but that's kind of exciting.
Do you still teach media relations and working with traditional media and television news, radio programming, newspapers? It's that industry, which is very much connected to ours, has changed dramatically. And, so many newspapers and media outlets have closed down and gone out of business or consolidated, merged. Is journalism dead? Is the news media changing?
Changing 100%. Dead, I hope never. They're very, very valuable to society and to our industry. I think with the push for authenticity and transparency, that's the core of earned media, right? Is, a third party talking about you in a way that's more authentic than how you might talk about yourself. We've got the School of Communication is kind of our overarching now. We have 4 majors, 3 are communication based and 1 is journalism. So we don't have an overlap directly, but we absolutely encourage students to kind of cross over. So we encourage all the communication students to write for the Lantern, right? The school. They don't want to call it newspaper, the digital media outlet. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but we think that experience is super, super valuable because they're going to be working with journalists, and because a lot of the skill set, even the entry level writing class, the class for journalism majors and the class for strategic communication majors are 80% the same, right? They're learning the same kind of styles. And then at the end of the StratCom class, we're also talking about writing press releases and pitching media, which they don't do in the journalism class. We're absolutely teaching it. They still learn inverted pyramid. They still learn AP style. They still learn how to pitch reporters. And they struggle a little bit. It is one of those critical thinking skills where when we talk about no, you're not just promoting your product. How do you make this newsworthy? How do you turn this into a story that a reporter wants to cover they're not here to do you a favor. They're here to report on something that's newsy, that's really beneficial to their readers or their viewers. That mindset shift is still a bit of a challenge, but it's really, really important. And they hear that when we go to agency visits and when we go visit corporations, they are hearing the importance of earned media and what that does for different businesses. So I think that they do understand it, but it is going to evolve. I'm interested to see where that industry goes over the next, 5 years, but I don't think it's going away.
You and I both, I think, profess to be word nerds, and we love writing. We love the written word. We love the AP style and grammar and sentence structure and all of that. Is that dead? Are we going to be able to maintain that kind of structure in our writing over the next decade?
I think, big picture, I think yes, because to me, the value of AP style is that it's the clearest, shortest, most accurate way to write something. So, and that's more and more important. The fewer words you use, the attention span is getting shorter and shorter. I think the clearer you can say something and the quicker you can get an accurate message across, the better in today's world. And that's really kind of the core of AP style. In the short term, the students that are really getting ahead are the ones that do those things and care about those writing skills. So I see employers gravitating toward those students, which says to me that those skills are still very, very meaningful. I also think that strong writing skills and those strong grammar skills ladder up to just a general attention to detail and a general professionalism that is very highly sought after in the workforce right now. Students that are very careful about their work, put forth their very best work. I don't think those things are going to go away. I do think there will be tools, right? So when the computers came out, everyone's like, oh, it's going to do this and that. And now we couldn't do our life without it. I think the same thing with the generative AI. So you might take an article and throw it into a chat and say, hey, can you check this for AP style? So maybe in 5 years, people entering the workforce won't have to memorize as much AP style as I have floating around in my brain, because they can click a button and review for AP style. And maybe that opens them up for more things in their brain that I don't have. But I don't think it's going to go away. It'll just be, what can we use tools to do to open up capacity with our minds and thinking for even more things.
So as you teach, are you encouraging students to use generative AI, or are you discouraging that so that they think for themselves at the beginning? But that's got to be a tough balance as a teacher, as a professor.
I was going to say, you're going to get me in trouble at Ohio State. No. So, there's the academic side of things where obviously, you need to be doing your own work in the classroom. It's about thinking and learning. So please don't have generative AI, do things for you that are here to teach you how to think and do the skills you need to do in the workforce. But I do it. I tell my students all the time, these tools are going to be very, very important in the overall workforce and very much so in the communication field. So you better be using them, be playing with them, be using them. And then everywhere we go, we ask professionals, and then I bring that back and say, okay, here's what they're saying. They're saying they are currently using it for idea generation. They're using it for outline generation. They're using it to iterate on headlines. They are not using it for work that goes directly to clients. They are not using it to put any proprietary data into a GPT that's not firewalled off from other places, because you're putting client information in there that's going into things other people can access. So we talk about the ethical sides of things, and we talk about what the workforce is doing and say, we really should be kind of emulating that inside. So use it for idea generation, use it to iterate on your headlines, but please don't use it as a substitute for your own strategic thinking. It is limited. It's limited to the data that it already has inside of it, and it's limited to how the algorithm makes it guess. Your brain is what's going to put together the research and the creative ideas and the thought process that really puts all those things together. That, good luck coming up with a prompt that's going to spit out exactly, what your brain's going to be able to spit out. We're far from that if it ever happens.
I love that thought on making sure we use the tools, but we don't use them as a substitute for our own brains, because there's just nothing that can create strategy the way that we can.
Even the students, when we got back from New York, we took 20 students to New York, and I said, well, what'd you guys hear? What surprised you about the industry? And we were talking specifically about AI. And they said, oh, they're not scared. None of them seem scared about AI. They said none of them said that it's going to replace jobs. So I think that was, they're okay, good. We're still going to have a job when we graduate. That's great.
Yeah. I do think this is a game changer, but it won't replace the need for public relations and interacting with stakeholders and building relationships, because no computer can build relationships like
Right.
humans can.
Well, PR, that's the basis, right? Relationships
Right.
between people, relationships between people and brands.
So one more question related to trends. The lines of communications and marketing, PR and marketing, seem to be ever more blurred. Do you see that continuing to merge or change? I've kind of given up over the last decade. I've been in business for 16 years with Shiftology and Wilt PR. And in the beginning, it was really important to me to let people know that we were a PR agency, and public relations was steeped in the essence of building relationships and helping to change people's attitudes and opinions and ideas. And at this point, I kind of like thrown up my hands and said, whatever, we're a marketing agency. We're not, you understand that, but most people see it, they see the outcomes and they look very similar to them. Do you think that's continuing to change, or do you see that being able to be distinguished anymore?
It is challenging in the academic setting because we tend to be siloed, right? So the true marketing, advertising, business classes are in a different college than the PR, communication, writing classes for us. So for my students specifically, we talk about it a lot, and we talk about how that's not the case in industry, that it's very much melded, and that if they're wise, they are trying to do both in school. Go take an accounting class, take a finance class, take a marketing class. They can get a minor. They can. We've done actually this year for the first time. We've done 2 collaborative events between PRSSA and the American Marketing Association student org, where we came together and did a case study competition. And we came together and had an instructor talk about, okay, what really are the differences and the similarities between PR and marketing? Because when they get out and see a job description that says, entry-level marketing associate, like they could apply and get that job and be fine in that job with a communication degree. And so it's important that they understand you can learn on the job enough to take different career paths, even if you have a comm degree versus a marketing degree or vice versa. But yes, as I work with different firms, I would say seeing an agency that is truly like, oh, we're only a PR agency, I don't see it as much anymore. It's more integrated communication. And I think it's the data piece, right? Like now that you can tie everything to data and you can tie it so much back to the business objectives, I think that's where some of the lines get blurred. Marketing also needs PR so much more because of the push for authenticity and the ability to avoid traditional ads. So I think there's a lot of things going on that kind of make them more symbiotic than they've ever been before.
I love being able to track and measure and prove what we've done does tie into the business goals, because that used to be very hard to do with column inches and the amount of time you were on television. That doesn't tie directly to business goals unless you're actually monitoring how that was received by the audience. And that was impossible to capture. Now we're able to capture so much of that through digital media. Changing gears here. It's International Women's Week. And I understand that you founded an organization that helps mothers in the workplace have better balance, and you kind of promote women's issues. And so I wanted to learn a little bit about that.
Yes. So I was prompted actually by a colleague who this was her brainchild. And she likes to say that she had this idea. And so she decided to go to the other busiest person that she knew and say, hey, we should do something else. I'm like, yeah, that is kind of what you did. So she's a teaching colleague of mine, Christy Sigler, and she kind of had the idea for a blog. And I love it because we learn the lifelong learning, right? I'm deep in SEO and all of those kinds of things. And it allows me to write, because teaching, a lot of times I don't get as much of the writing as I used to get. But yeah, so we have a blog called salteffect.com, and it is for moms of tweens and teens. We just saw a big gap where there were a lot of resources for moms of littles. It's a challenging time for all moms of tweens and teens. So we like to talk about communication. We like to talk about quality time and family and how you balance those things, and with a digital world and a lot coming at our teens.
I have 3 teenagers, and I will definitely be looking into that a little bit more, because I can use all the advice I can get right now.
It's fun, but there's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, they just don't prepare you for that. There's a lot of information out there for how to deal with infants and toddlers and even grade school children. And then you get to the teen years and they just expect you to have figured it all out. But they're these totally different human beings. They're like, they just change one day and they're completely different than they ever were before.
Well, it can be kind of lonely for moms too at that point, because I feel like there's such a bond created when kids are little, right? Your ability to kind of connect with other people is different. And especially for working moms, right? You're busy and you're running these teams all around, and the sense of community among moms can get lost a little bit more easily.
Absolutely. Because if we value being with our families and spending that time with them, then we have less time for that community feeling. So we do need those resources. So I commend you for doing that. Thank you for taking that torch and providing information for those of us who are in that stage of life, because it's certainly not an easy one.
But it has been fun to be an entrepreneur and have another female colleague that we can build something and grow it as our own. So,
well, as we wrap up here, is there anything that you would like for folks to know? How could we get a hold of you if somebody wanted to follow up with you to get more information?
My email is the best way to get a hold of me. So sterenberg.2@osu.edu. So you can find me on the Ohio State School of Communication website if that's easier to reach out that way. I'm always looking for professionals to come in and speak to students. If professionals are interested in serving as a mentor, we can definitely look at that. I guess I would just say there are a lot of students who really care and who really want to do good work. The day that I'm not excited about what the next generation is going to bring to the industry is probably the day I'll move on in my career. They do have a very different mindset. Like as each generation comes up, what they're looking for and what they want is different, but I'm really hopeful with what I see in the classroom. And I think they're going to take the industry in exciting new directions. We have a lot to teach them too. All the skills that have come before them, there's a lot to add to the excitement and the creativity and the energy that they're going to bring.
Well, no pressure, but we're counting on you out here in the industry to prepare our next generation and have them ready to work.
I will do my best. I will do what I can.
Well, thank you so much for the time today, Mary. We appreciate having you on and all of your insight, and count me in for coming to speak to one of your classes or having them out to Shiftology sometime. Thanks again.
Wonderful. Thanks, Melanie.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Shooting the Shift. Again, you can connect with Mary Sterenberg via email at sterenberg.2@osu.edu. Or you can find her on the Ohio State University School of Communication website. And be sure to check out some great resources for busy moms of tweens and teens at salteffect.com. You can also look us up at shift-ology.com, where you can learn more about who we are and what we do, and even get in touch with us to set up a free 30-minute discovery meeting to learn more about the services we can provide. On behalf of the entire gang here at Shiftology, I'm Dan Toland saying thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Shooting the Shift.